I've been holding this inside for so long, and today I need you to hear it. There's something you don't know, something only I can tell you. Stay with me, because what I'm about to say might change everything between us. You know, life has a strange way of bringing people back to us, not through coincidence, not through accident, but through love. There was a time when I thought I had lost you forever, not because I stopped loving you, but because life became louder than my heart. Dreams, struggles, silence, they built walls between us. And then my mother looked at me one evening. She saw something in my eyes I was trying to hide. She didn't ask many questions. Mothers don't need to. They feel the spaces we pretend aren't empty. She said, "Love like this doesn't disappear. It waits." And without telling me, she traced you through old conversations, through familiar streets, through people who still remembered your name. Not because she wanted to control my story, but because she knew my heart was still living in yours. Tonight, I'm not standing here to talk about fate. I'm here to talk about love that refuses to give up, about a mother who believed in my heart when I was too tired to believe in it myself, and about you, the one my heart never stopped tracing. I never told her how much I missed you. I never sat across from her at the kitchen table and said your name out loud. I didn't have to. Mothers have this quiet way of reading what we try so hard to hide. She would watch me stir my tea long after the sugar had dissolved. She would notice how certain songs made me step outside for air. She would see the way my voice shifted when someone mentioned the past. I thought I was composed. I thought I had buried it well. But love doesn't bury itself easily, and a mother can hear the echo of it even in silence. There were nights when I came home exhausted, not from work, not from responsibilities, but from pretending I was fine. I would sit on the edge of my bed and replay memories like old films projected onto a blank wall. The way you laughed when you tried not to. The way your hands moved when you explained something you cared about. The way your eyes softened when you thought I wasn't looking. I carried those moments carefully, like fragile glass in my chest. I thought I was protecting myself by not speaking of you. I thought silence would make the ache smaller. It didn't. She would pass by my room sometimes and pause at the door, not to question, not to intrude, just to look. I could feel her presence, steady and patient. One evening, she sat beside me without saying anything. The house was quiet. The world outside seemed far away. She placed her hand over mine, and in that simple gesture, she asked every question I had been avoiding. I kept my eyes forward, afraid that if I met hers, everything would spill out. "You don't lose someone like that," she said softly, almost to herself. "Not when it's real." I didn't answer. My throat felt tight. I had convinced myself that love fades when distance grows, that if two people drift apart long enough, the current changes direction. But she looked at me as if she could see straight through that lie. In the days that followed, she didn't press me for details. She didn't demand explanations. Instead, she began asking small, careful questions. Do you still think about them? Do certain places remind you? If you could speak freely, what would you say? Each question was gentle, like she was untying knots, one at a time. I remember the afternoon she found an old photograph tucked inside a book on the shelf. It must have slipped there months ago. It was a simple picture, nothing dramatic, nothing staged, just you and me standing too close to call it accidental. She held it between her fingers and looked at it for a long moment before handing it to me. "You look alive here," she said. That word stayed with me, alive. I hadn't realized how dim I had become since we drifted apart. I functioned. I smiled when required. I moved through my days responsibly. But that spark, she pointed out, it was different. It was something I hadn't felt in a while. She began tracing you in ways I didn't even notice at first. She would ask about mutual friends. She would casually mention neighborhoods where you used to spend time. She would linger on conversations about the past, as if mapping something invisible. I thought it was coincidence. I thought it was nostalgia. I didn't understand that she was following threads. One evening she came home later than usual, There was a quiet determination in her eyes. She sat down across from me and folded her hands on the table. "I heard something today," she said carefully. My heart reacted before my mind did. A sudden rush, a familiar fear. Hope is a dangerous thing when you've tried so hard to extinguish it. She told me she had run into someone who knew you. Not intentionally, not planned, just one of those moments. Life arranges without warning. And in that conversation, your name surfaced, not in regret, not in bitterness, but in memory. "She still asks about you," my mother said softly. The room felt smaller. I had prepared myself for indifference. I had convinced myself that I was a closed chapter in your story. Hearing that I was still a question in your world unsettled everything I thought I understood. I asked her why she cared so much, why she was investing herself in something I had already accepted as over. She smiled in that knowing way mothers do. "Because you never stopped loving," she replied. "You just stopped believing it mattered." There's something humbling about having your deepest truth spoken by someone else. I had tried to reframe our story as a lesson, a beautiful chapter that simply ended, but she saw the unfinished edges. She saw the way I still turned at the sound of your name. She saw the way my shoulders straightened when hope flickered, even briefly. Days turned into weeks, and she continued her quiet tracing. She would ask around, gently, respectfully, not to interfere, not to force anything, just to understand. She treated your memory like something sacred, not something to be dismissed. One afternoon, she sat beside me with a small piece of paper in her hand. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't look dramatic. She looked calm. "I found where she's working now," she said. My heart pounded. So loudly I was sure she could hear it. I stared at that paper like it held the weight of the universe. Part of me wanted to grab it immediately. Another part wanted to push it away and protect myself from what could follow. She didn't pressure me. She simply placed it on the table and let it rest there. "You don't have to do anything," she said, "but don't let fear decide for you." Fear had been my constant companion since losing you. Fear of rejection. Fear of discovering that time had changed everything. Fear of finding out that what I preserved so carefully in my heart had faded in yours. But beneath that fear was something stronger, a quiet, stubborn love that refused to disappear. That night, I held that piece of paper in my hands for a long time. I thought about the first day we met, the uncertainty, the curiosity, the way conversations flowed without effort. I thought about the arguments too, the misunderstandings, the pride that sometimes stood between us. Love isn't flawless. It's raw and imperfect and deeply human, but it's also resilient when it's real. My mother knocked gently before entering my room. She didn't ask what I had decided. She simply sat down beside me. "Whatever happens," she said, "you'll finally know." There was comfort in that, not in the guarantee of a happy ending, but in the promise of clarity. She wasn't chasing a fairy tale. She was protecting my heart from the regret of never trying. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the curtains, I realized something simple but powerful. My mother didn't trace you because she wanted to control my destiny. She traced you because she recognized the version of me that existed when I loved you openly. She missed that version, and she wanted me to find him again, whether it led back to you or simply back to myself. Love changes a person. It softens edges. It deepens perspective. It makes you braver in ways you don't immediately notice. Losing love can harden those same edges if you let it. I had grown cautious, guarded, efficient with my emotions, but she saw that underneath all of it, I was still the same person who once looked at you like you were the beginning of something extraordinary. When I finally gathered the courage to stand outside the place she had written down, my hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from significance. This wasn't just about seeing you again. It was about honoring what we had. It was about acknowledging that some connections deserve more than silent endings. I thought about my mother at home, probably pretending not to check the clock too often. I imagined her quiet prayers, not for a specific outcome, but for peace, for truth, for whatever would allow my heart to move forward. Honestly, I stood there. I understood something deeper. Love isn't always about possession. It's about recognition. Recognition on the impact someone had on your soul, recognizing that certain bonds shape who you become, and recognizing that sometimes, even when distance intervenes, the thread remains. My mother traced you not because she believed in perfect love stories. She traced you because she believed in me. She believed that running from something meaningful diminishes a person. She believed that closure isn't found in silence, but in courage. And in that moment, before I even saw you, I felt gratitude. Gratitude for a woman who understood that the heart doesn't operate on logic alone. Gratitude for someone who valued my happiness enough to step quietly into my unfinished story. Gratitude for the reminder that love, when it's true, doesn't disappear simply because circumstances change. I took a breath and stepped forward, carrying not just my own hope, but the strength she had lent me through her unwavering belief. I carried the memory of every quiet conversation, every reassuring glance, every gentle push toward honesty. I carried the understanding that even if the outcome wasn't what I once imagined, I would no longer be hiding from what I felt, because sometimes the greatest act of love isn't between two people who are trying to find their way back to each other. Sometimes it's the love of a mother who sees her child drifting away from his own heart and decides, without applause or recognition, to trace the path back to where it all began, following faint footprints of memory through conversations in streets and familiar names, believing that even if the road leads somewhere unexpected, it is better to walk it than to spend a lifetime wondering what might have happened if courage had been stronger than fear, and if love had been given the chance to speak one more time, then if the voice trembles, and even if the answer isn't guaranteed. Because in the quiet spaces where regret usually settles, there is now movement, there is now breath, there is now the undeniable awareness that love was never something to escape from, but something to face with open eyes and an unguarded heart, even when it feels fragile, even when it feels uncertain, even when every step forward feels like stepping into the unknown without a promise of how the story will unfold, and yet choosing to step anyway, holding on to the simple truth she reminded me of from the very beginning, that real love leaves a mark too deep to ignore and too meaningful to pretend it never existed. And that sometimes being brave doesn't look like grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but like standing still long enough to admit that your heart still whispers a name you tried so hard to forget, and allowing yourself to follow that whisper wherever it may lead. When we drifted apart, it didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic goodbye, no final scene where everything was said perfectly and the door closed with certainty. It was quieter than that, slower. Messages became shorter, calls became less frequent. Responsibilities grew heavier, timing became complicated, and somewhere in that space between what we felt and what we could manage, distance settled in like an uninvited guest. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that life was just testing us, that strong love bends but doesn't break. I held on to that belief with steady hands, but days turned into weeks and weeks into months, and the silence grew more familiar than your voice. I learned how to function without expecting your messages. I learned how to fill my evenings with distractions. I learned how to speak about you in past tense, even though my heart resisted every time. People assume that when something ends, it disappears. They think love is like a candle. Once blown out, it's gone. But that's not how it felt. It felt more like a fire buried under ash. You couldn't see the flames anymore, but the heat was still there, quiet, persistent, waiting for oxygen. There were moments when I almost convinced myself I had moved on. I could laugh again. I could focus on work. I could plan my days without thinking of you constantly. But then something small would happen. I would hear a song we once played in the car. I would pass a cafe where we sat for hours, talking about everything and nothing. I would see someone wearing the same color you used to love, and suddenly the calm I built would fracture. Distance changes the shape of love. It stretches it, it tests its patience, it exposes insecurities you didn't know you carried. I began questioning everything. Was it real? Did it mean the same to you as it did to me? If it was meant to last, why did it fade into silence? I asked myself those questions late at night, staring at the ceiling in a room that felt larger than it used to. The space beside me was just space again. No warmth, no soft breathing, no shared quiet, just absence. But even in absence, you remained. I would catch myself forming sentences in my mind as if you were still listening. I would imagine telling you about my day. I would rehearse jokes you would have appreciated. Love had shifted from shared experience to private memory, but it hadn't dissolved. There's something humbling about loving someone who is no longer standing in front of you. There's no reward for it, no reassurance, no confirmation that the feeling is returned. It becomes a choice you make quietly, every day, without applause. I didn't choose to keep loving you because it was easy. I chose it because it was honest. Friends encouraged me to let go. They meant well. They spoke about self-respect, about new beginnings, about not holding on to what isn't holding on to you. I listened. I understood their logic. But love doesn't always operate on logic. Sometimes it exists in a deeper place beyond pride and beyond fear. I remember the first time someone asked me if I was ready to meet someone new. The question felt premature, almost invasive, not because I was incapable of moving forward, but because a part of me was still standing in the place where we last felt whole. I realized then that distance hadn't erased you. It had simply made you quieter. There's a difference between forgetting someone and learning how to live without them. I learned how to live without you. I learned how to wake up and not check my phone instinctively. I learned how to make plans without imagining you beside me. I learned how to smile without immediately thinking of sharing it with you. But I never forgot. Sometimes I would replay our final conversation, searching for hidden meanings. I would analyze tone, pauses, words left unsaid. I wondered if there was a moment when we could have turned things around. A sentence that, if phrased differently, might have changed everything. Regret has a subtle way of weaving itself into memory, but along with regret, there was gratitude. Gratitude that I had experienced something real, something that altered the way I saw the world. Before you, love felt theoretical. It was something I believed in, something I hoped for. With you, it became tangible. It had weight, it had texture, it had presence. Distance taught me patience, it taught me resilience. It forced me to sit with my own emotions instead of depending on you to soothe them. I discovered parts of myself I hadn't examined before. My fears of abandonment, my tendency to withdraw when overwhelmed, my quiet expectation that love should always feel effortless. Nothing truly meaningful is effortless. There were evenings when I almost reached out. My fingers hovered over your name. I would type a message and erase it, type again, erase again. I didn't want to intrude on your life. I didn't want to reopen something you might have already closed. So I stayed silent, convincing myself that if you wanted to speak, you would, but silence can be misleading. Two people can be equally afraid at the same time, each waiting for the other to bridge the gap. I often wondered what you felt during that distance. Did certain places remind you of me? Did you ever scroll through old photos and pause a little longer than necessary? Did you ever feel that sudden rush of memory that makes your chest tighten unexpectedly? Or had you truly moved on, stepping into a new chapter without hesitation? That uncertainty was the hardest part, not knowing whether I was the only one still carrying us in my heart. Time has a wife, Ev, softening sharp edges. The pain became less urgent. The longing became less overwhelming, but it never completely vanished. It settled into a quiet corner of my being, like a room I rarely entered but never locked. I began to understand that love doesn't always need proximity to exist. It doesn't require constant communication to remain meaningful. Some loves become internal landscapes. They shape your decisions. They influence your growth. They teach you lessons you carry into every future connection. Because of you, I became more attentive, more aware of how fragile and powerful emotion can be. I learned that saying, "I care about you," is not the same as proving it consistently. I learned that timing can challenge even the strongest bonds. I learned that pride can build walls higher than distance ever could. If I'm honest, part of me was afraid to confront the possibility that what we had was unfinished. It felt safer to label it as over. Finished stories don't demand courage. Unfinished ones do, but deep down I knew something remained unresolved. Not necessarily in conflict, but in feeling. The love didn't end in anger. It ended in circumstances, in misalignment, in timing that wasn't kind. And love that ends without bitterness often lingers. The longest. I started to see distance differently. Instead of viewing it as proof of failure, I began to see it as a test of authenticity. If what we felt was shallow, it would have faded quickly. If it was built on convenience, it would have dissolved under pressure. But it didn't. It adapted, it transformed, it became quieter, yes, but not absent. There were moments when I felt your presence in unexpected ways. A sudden calm during a stressful day. A memory that made me smile instead of ache. A dream that felt so vivid it lingered long after I woke up. Love, even from afar, has a way of reaching across spaces we can't measure. I won't pretend I was always strong. There were nights when I missed you so intensely it felt physical. When I questioned my decisions. When I wondered if I had let go too easily. When I feared that the opportunity to fix things had slipped away permanently. But even in those vulnerable moments, I never resented you. I never wished we hadn't met. Because loving you changed me in ways I value, it deepened my capacity for empathy. It expanded my understanding of partnership. It revealed parts of my heart I didn't know existed. Distance can erase presence, but it cannot erase impact. I carried you into conversations with myself about the future. When I thought about the kind of life I wanted, you were still part of the image, not necessarily as a certainty, but as a possibility. And sometimes possibility is enough to keep hope alive. Hope is delicate. It can become unrealistic if held too tightly, but it can also be a quiet companion, reminding you that not everything unfinished is broken. I realized something important over time. Loving someone doesn't obligate them to stay, and losing someone doesn't invalidate what you shared. Both things can be true simultaneously. We can acknowledge distance without diminishing love. If one day our paths never cross again, I will still be grateful, because the love we had shaped the man I became. It taught me patience. It taught me vulnerability. It taught me that my heart is capable of depth I once underestimated. But if distance was only a chapter and not the conclusion, then perhaps what we felt was strong enough to survive its silence. Until clarity arrives, I hold on to one simple truth. Love that is real does not vanish quietly. It transforms, it adapts. It waits in the background of your life, steady and unassuming, reminding you that some connections are not defined by constant presence, but by enduring meaning. And even if miles stretch between two people, even if time creates new routines and new realities, even if the world insists that what is unseen must be forgotten, the heart remembers differently. The heart carries what logic tries to release. The heart preserves the tone of a voice, the warmth of a hand, the way two souls once recognized each other in a crowded world and felt less alone. And that kind of recognition does not disappear simply because circumstances shift. It remains like a quiet light within, not demanding attention, not forcing return, but glowing softly in the background of every decision, every reflection, every moment of stillness, where you admit to yourself that distance changed the structure of the relationship, but never erased the feeling that made it worth holding on to in the first place.